remember I followed my teacher into a room that was a fire escape, but when I walked through it, I realized it wasn't, and it was just a staircase leading down to the basement of the school. And I doubt anyone else knew about this other than this teacher. And when I went down those stairs, I'm telling you guys, it was the biggest mistake of my life. Yo, what is going on, you guys? My name's Bubba, and welcome back to another insane but crazy story. So this story all takes place back when I was in high school, and this was my grade 9 year. Now in grade 9, I never really knew how weird high school was gonna be because, to be fair, everyone in my high school was immature, really dumb, and I guess still hitting puberty. I don't know what it is, but I feel like this generation hits puberty way later than they should. But as weird as that sounds, I remember one thing I also noticed that was a major difference from going from middle school to high school was that my teachers were a lot more secretive about their personal lives than before. Like, I remember back when I was in middle school, my middle school teacher wouldn't mind getting all personal with us, talking about her fiance, how crazy life's getting, and you know, all the exciting things that she was planning on doing even for the summer. But when I entered high school, I realized that all that changed. All the teachers were really closed off about their personal lives, nor did they want us to know anything about them. Like, even if we ended up finding them on Facebook, they would just automatically block us right away if we sent a friend request. Don't ask how I know because, well, let's just say I have a little experience from that department, but that's a story for a different time. But I remember there was one moment in my grade 9 year that was the most insane thing ever. And in my grade 9 year, I decided to take a thing called criminology. If you guys don't know what criminology is, basically it's where you study how criminals do things and how, you know, detectives try to find criminals and serial killers. It's a whole, you know, class of basically learning how to solve crime. And I took this class not because I want to learn about criminals, but I want to learn how detectives and cops would, like, you know, solve certain crimes. So I remember I was basically entering that classroom one time, and when I sat down for my first day in that class, it was really awkward because right away we realized that the teacher was like almost like 20 minutes late. And when she walked in, the first thing she says is, "All right, class, so I'm 20 minutes late. Anyone have any ideas of why?" All the students put up their hand as if we're solving the case of where was our teacher for the last 20 minutes, but I think it was just a way for her to make an excuse of why she was away and make it into a lesson. But honestly, I didn't really care. We all started playing the game of where she was, but at the end of it, she ended up just saying no to all the guesses we had and just said, "Oh, well, it's time to make sure you guys learn how to become detectives." And that's when she gave us our first lesson. I don't really remember the lessons, to be honest, but one thing I do remember about this teacher is about how often she would leave the classroom. I think like for the first like 2 weeks of me being in that class, one thing I noticed that any opportunity she had to leave the classroom, she would just go. And during lunchtime, after school, she was never available. She would always just disappear into the hallways, and that's it. She would just be gone. A lot of people thought like this was a part of like the whole classroom and kind of like her main character syndrome that she had since she was teaching us criminology, but I thought there was much more to her. So I remember one time when she ended up standing up and leaving the classroom, I stood up from my desk while everyone was still in class, by the way, and I went onto her computer. I went onto her computer and tried to see if there was anything on there that I could learn about the teacher and like what's going on with her and where she would go. But the only thing I found when I went on her computer were links to certain websites that I don't think legally you're allowed to go on. Like, the things you were able to buy on this website were like handcuffs and rope and basically all the things you would need to like kidnap someone. I thought this was really weird, so I remember I ended up pulling out my phone, taking photos of it, until a student in the classroom ended up saying, "Oh, Bubba, are you trying to cheat? Are you trying to get the answer key, bro?" "Yeah, sure," is what I said, and I ended up going to sit back down at my desk to not raise any more suspicion. Because like I said, in high school, not everyone's that mature. Going on from there, I remember it was really awkward the next day of school, because the next day when I saw her go on her computer, she was probably doing the same thing. She was just scrolling through something that I couldn't see because I couldn't see her monitor, but then I decided to stand up and walk up to her. Now, standing up and walking up to her was like a last minute decision I made. I didn't really know what I was gonna say until I brought up the worksheet with me and just ended up asking her for help on the question. But right as I walked up towards her desk, I remember she ended up pressing Alt F4. And for those of you guys who aren't computer wizards, basically when you press Alt F4 on a computer, it closes what's ever open on the screen right at that moment. I remember I ended up looking at her and I basically ended up asking the question, and she ended up answering it like any other teacher. But then I ended up going back to sit down, and right away I ended up realizing that she was back on her computer doing the same thing. But then the most oddest thing ended up happening, where she stood up in front of the classroom and said, "Okay, class, I have to quickly go into a staff meeting. I'll talk to all you guys later." And she left. Now, instead of going on her computer, I decided to basically stand up and see if she was actually having a staff meeting. But right away, as I walked out of the classroom, I walked towards another class that was still in session, and I saw their teacher was still there. And when I went towards the offices where they would hold their staff meetings, I realized that everyone was still just as they were. At this moment, I realized my teacher did not go to a staff meeting. She was definitely going somewhere else. And that moment, I knew I need to figure out what. I remember that same day, it was around lunchtime, and I ended up basically jotting down a bunch of notes into my phone, basically planning on what I would do. And this whole plan, I'm not gonna lie, could get me in serious trouble, but I just wanted to see what was happening and what was going on with this teacher. In a way, it's kind of funny because we were learning criminology, so I guess this counts as me solving a crime. But going on with the story, I remember when it was close to being after school, there was still one more class I had to go to. But that class, I decided to skip. The reason I skipped it was because I wanted to figure out what in the world this teacher was doing. So I ended up basically setting up a stakeout right by my criminology class, and I waited for my teacher to come out. As I was just sitting there waiting, I remember I ended up, pulling out my phone, watching some YouTube videos, and then finally my teacher came out 20 minutes before class was supposed to end. I found it really suspicious, so I started following her around the school. One thing that was really weird is that as she was walking around though, I realized she would keep looking around her surroundings to make sure she wasn't being followed. And it was not making it any easier to follow her, but finally I ended up seeing her enter a fire escape that was in my school. Now when she walked in, I was majorly surprised because I thought the school alarm would end up going off since someone went through it. But apparently the fire alarm, I guess, was broken for this specific door. I have really no idea. So I ended up following in behind her, and I saw there was a giant staircase. My teacher was nowhere to be seen, but this staircase did not lead to an escape. It ended up leading actually to the basement of the school that no one was allowed into. I found this really weird, and I didn't know if anyone else knew about it. But at that moment, I didn't know what else to do, so I ended up pulling out my phone. I started recording and started going down the stairs. As I went to the bottom of the stairs, I saw there was another door, and it had the same label as, there was an alarm, don't open it, fire escape. But I decided to open it anyway because there was no other way my teacher could have went. And when I walked through that door, I realized my teacher was sitting there on this table, and around me I realized there were all stone concrete walls. And when I looked over on the ground, I realized there were chains that were literally just there. I ended up looking at my teacher, and my teacher instantly turns around and looks at me and says, "Baba, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," is what I said to her. And that's when she starts freaking out. She runs over at me and she grabs me. She ends up grabbing me by the shirt, dragging me to where the chains were, and ended up locking my ankle to the chain that was concrete to the ground. I found this super weird, and I looked at her and I'm like, what are you doing? "Baba, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here? Why do you have a dungeon under here?" "Baba, it's none of your concern. You cannot say anything." "What do you mean I can't say anything? I can't be locked down here. I have parents, I remember she ends up looking at me and totally freaking out. She totally did not expect a student to be following her. And I ended up asking her one last time, "What are you doing here? Honestly, just tell me what you're doing." "Baba, you see, a long time ago, my parents used to go to this school, and they always told me about how there was an underground area where a lot of girls would get hurt. Now, I didn't believe them, but I became a teacher at the school, and I decided to follow this trail that they told me about, and now here I am. So now every day I come in here trying to figure out what happened down here." At that moment, I started to look around, and the more I looked around, I realized that she wasn't lying. She would bring all the materials and stuff she was teaching us in school for getting fingerprints to finding blood, and she had her own amount of equipment there to basically figure out what happened and what really went down. At this moment, I looked at her and I'm like, "So is this all for a lesson?" "What? Oh no, definitely not. This is a severe case." "Then why don't you just bring it to the police?" "Well, that's the thing. Since my parents told me about it, I don't know if they're involved." And that's when I told her that, sometimes our past doesn't define who we are, and we just need to figure out what really happened down here. If it's that big of a deal, the police should know about it. I remember she ends up untying my chain afterwards, and she gets close to me and hugs me. Really have no idea what really happened there. I guess I had a heart-to-heart with her in a way. But then me and her went back up the stairs, and we ended up calling 911. Cops ended up coming to the school, which everyone was freaking out of why, until my criminology teacher ended up coming out and escorting the cops to, the basement, or I guess the dungeon area. And apparently, it was a crime scene. A lot of people were shocked, but it ended up hitting the news afterwards, and I guess our school ended up becoming on the map for having a dungeon. To be honest, like I said earlier, high school, middle school are two very different things. But if you guys ever felt like your teacher had a secret, then fall for more embarrassing stories just like this one. Peace out, guys.